talk about donkey metabolism, donkey nutrition, how they are different, and how the environment in which we put them can often result in disease and health problems. And then we're also going to talk about their parasites, and again, some of the things that cause loss of good welfare because of medical issues. To start off, we're extremely fortunate to have the head veterinary surgeon from the Donkey Sanctuary here, Dr. Karen Rickards. And Karen is going to soldier on here, not only doing her talk on donkey metabolism and metabolic conditions, but also she's going to take Dr. Mariano Hernandez's talk on donkey nutrition, because Mariano is stuck in Veracruz without a visa. Yeah, so, you know, I mean, he's a professor. Why can't you get rid of a visa? So, anyway. But Karen is an expert in this field, probably deals with more donkey health issues and more donkey surgical problems than probably any veterinarian potentially in the world. So it doesn't get any better than that, and I'm going to turn the floor over now to Dr. Rickards.
No question. But I'm going to talk about nutrition and how we feed donkeys. It's obviously a very important topic, and as Eric pointed out, not least because of the environment, certainly in the UK we keep them, and comparable environments around Europe and in the US as well. So we've heard a little bit about how donkeys have evolved already, and also about the concepts of how they source their food in the wild. And certainly they've evolved to both graze and browse, and that's important from the point of view of the environments that we then put them into in order to be able to allow them to achieve both those aspects of their feeding behaviour. And as a result of that, because they need this continued throughput of food through their digestive system, what we need to be trying to provide them with and what they're adapted to is a high fibre diet with low nutritional quality. And that's often the challenge we have, because a lot of the diets that we have available to feed them are obviously horse-based, and that's not necessarily what most horse diets are trying to achieve. So as a result of their evolution, they do have quite specific both physiological and metabolic requirements that are different to horses, and we have to bear that in mind when we're trying to formulate a feeding plan for our donkeys. So the general rule of thumb really is, as it says at the bottom there, donkeys generally really do very well on very little compared to most horses. What we're really going to focus on today is energy and how we provide that energy. Energy is a nutrient in itself. It has to be derived from something we feed the donkey, and we can find lots of different energy sources. And I've sort of tried to do the comparisons between what our donkeys or horses might eat and what we might eat in order to get energy from different sources. So we've got fibre at the top. Obviously, from a donkey's point of view, that can come from any of the hays, straws, grasses, hay and straws that we feed them. Obviously, we can eat some sort of high fibre cereals if we want to get energy from fibre. Then we've got starch, and in the equine world, that will often come from the feeding of cereals. From our point of view, we can eat a load of things like potatoes. Then there's sugars. A lot of those will be in the grass, which is something we need to be very aware of when we're allowing donkeys access to grass. We'll talk about that a bit later as well. And then we get that obviously from our sugary treats as well, things like cookies and stuff. And then there's fat as well, which we'll talk about a bit specifically for one type of condition where you might want to be putting a bit more energy into donkeys. source where you can get energy from, but the type of energy and the amount of energy you get from those food sources can be very variable, and it's what we're going to now look at from the point of view of what we need to be providing to donkeys. But before we can actually work out what sort of energy we want to provide to our donkeys, we actually need to know how much energy they actually require. And it probably isn't surprising to you guys that there's actually not a huge amount of information out there about it. So a while ago, Donkey Sanctuary did undertake a nutrition trial. And what we were looking at was both the dry matter intake, so in essence the amount of dry food that a donkey would require to eat in a day, and also how much energy that food would have to contain to provide a donkey. And here we're talking about maintenance, so this donkey isn't necessarily a working donkey, it's just maintenance levels of energy required to keep a donkey at what we call a normal body condition. We work on the 5-point body condition scale, so talking about a body condition score of 3. So again, just to go back, why we're doing this feed trial? Well, mainly because all the work that's really been done is in horses. Obviously, the horse industry is a large industry. It's an economically very important industry. People have done a lot of work to find out how best to feed horses, doing various different forms of performance. But from the point of view of the donkey, really say that there really isn't any data. There wasn't any data out there. And when you look at the sort of recommendations that were out there, so the only real recommendations that were out there came from Taylor, and that was to suggest that we fed 75% of what you feed a pony of the same body weight. So that's what we're just trying to do, is just confirm whether or not that was an appropriate amount to be looking to feed donkeys. So to say, we looked at the dry matter intake, we looked at what their energy requirements were, and what we're aiming to do, and this is the challenge, is to satisfy appetite, because that's really important. But in doing that, we don't want to overfeed them, because unfortunately what we do when we overfeed energy, particularly an animal that's then not performing and not actually utilising that energy, is it unfortunately becomes fat, and that's what we want to try and avoid. So this is sort of the main points of the study and the findings. So down here we've got the pony values. In the centre we've got what we would use if we were currently using 75% of pony values as being what we would require to feed donkeys, and the far column over there is the actual results we found. So when you look at it from the point of view of appetite, we're not far off with regards to what the appetite of a donkey is. It's about 1.3 to 1.8% of body weight. That's what the percentage is there, so body weight, which is fairly comparable to 75% of ponies the same size. Likewise, when we looked at dry matter intake, we can see again we're not too far off. It's a little bit lower than the 75% of pony. But we're not too far off. But I think the striking feature, and this is a really important thing here, is what actually the energy requirements are for a donkey at maintenance. And we looked at it in two different seasons from the point of view of certainly the UK climate. And we certainly saw that if you look at in our summer season, if we were feeding donkeys an energy content that was, so yeah, if we were feeding donkeys at 75% of the pony's energy requirements, you can see the donkey, particularly in the summer, requires significantly less than that. So we would certainly be overfeeding with digestible energy, which, as I just said, is unfortunately going to mean that we're laying down fat. In the winter, it's not so bad because they are adapted. These animals are adapted for warm climates. So when we get to the winter, there is an increased energy demand for heat. So you're not going to be in such a bad situation over the winter months. But this was really key to us, is that it's very easy to overfeed when you've got good weather. If you're feeding comparable to 75% of a pony's body weight. So when you take that together, what does that mean from the point of view of how we should be feeding donkeys, from the point of view of the energy value of the feed? So a fair bit of data on here, we can just look at one line really just to get a flavour for what we're talking about here. So we've got a donkey, a fairly small donkey, it's 150 kilos. So calculating the digestive energy content, this was at the summer values by the way, so that was at the 88 kilojoules per kilo. So roughly their energy requirement for the day is going to be somewhere around 12 to 14 megajoules per day. And we know again from the body, from their daily intake, we've taken it as an average of 1.5% of body weight. That's about 2.3 kilos. So if you do the maths on that, what we therefore need to be providing them with is a source of energy that's at about 5.5 to 6.5 megajoules per kilo of dry matter. And when you bear in mind that things like most hays and haylages come in at about 7 to 8, possibly 9, and then most even fibre feeds are going to come in at sort of 7.5 megajoules per kilo. And when you're getting up to talking about feeding concentrates, you're up in the 10, 12 kind of megajoules per kilo of energy that you'd be feeding donkeys. So you're massively over the energy requirements for just the maintenance. I just want to reiterate, this is definitely just for maintenance. Obviously, if the animals are working, clearly they have additional energy requirements. So that's sort of, and it's quite difficult to achieve that. I'm not saying it's easy, because you've also just said that we need to be able to make sure that we have a continuous throughput of food because of the way the digestive system is laid out. They do need to have fibre coming through their browsers, they need continuous access, but we need to find ways to get continuous access that has low energy. And why are we worried? Well, we said that by providing too much energy, these animals are going to become overweight. We're going to touch on a few of these things later on when we talk about some of the metabolic problems in donkeys as well. But we certainly know that feeding too much starch and sugars certainly predisposes to laminitis. We also know, and we found this in another study we looked at from the point of view of gastric ulceration, we know that feeding concentrates, so excessive starches and sugars, again, predisposes donkeys to gastric ulceration. We've already said that if you give them too much energy, they're going to convert that into fat, and one of the main organs that they then deposit that fat in is the liver, so you run the risk of fatty liver. I'm not trying to say that overfeeding induces arthritis, but obviously, particularly if you've got older donkeys, they are more predisposed to conditions such as arthritis, and if you're loading those limbs with excessive weight, then that isn't going to help that donkey at all either. And we're going to talk a bit later about the other two issues at the end there, so I'm not going to say too much more about those at the moment. But the sort of take-home message there is that not only do these animals become overweight, you then, in essence, predispose them to a number of painful and potentially life-threatening conditions. So, the best way we're going to be able to provide this constant access of low-energy digestible energy food source is by providing fibre. And why is that? Well, predominantly because of the number of functions that fibre then helps, the normal kind of function that fibre helps that donkey to carry out. First one being at the start of the digestive tract. So donkeys, because they've evolved to be these continuous browsers, they have a continuous secretion of gastric acid into their stomachs. You need something to neutralise that. And one of the ways that you neutralise that is by providing a food source that will then chew. They produce a lot of saliva associated with that, and then when that passes into the stomach, that helps to neutralise the acid that's being produced in the stomach. So the ability to chew is very important. The other, again, important stuff from the gut's point of view is because they've evolved from this point of view, they need continuous throughput. To maintain normal gut activity, so maintain peristalsis, you need a continuous throughput. If you don't maintain peristalsis, then you do run the risk of other potential complications such as colic, compaction colics. So you do want this, and for a healthy gut, you need it to be working on something for pretty much 24 hours a day. It's also important from the point of view of the environment in the gut, from the point of view of the microbes in there, from what they need to digest. They need a source there available throughout the day to be able to perform appropriate microbial digestion. And we mentioned earlier that obviously we have seasons, and certainly when we get into the winter seasons, energy is an important form of providing a heat source as well. The fibre is important. How can we provide that fibre? We've got a load of options available to us, but again, our choices are going to depend on thinking quite carefully about the energy content of that fibre, because it's not the same. So we've got a sort of an ever decreasing level of energy content here, ranging from certainly what we've got for the growing season, grass at the top there, through your preserved fibres down to straw at the bottom. And there's also obviously the option of feeding things like alfalfa, but again we have to bear in mind that's going to have a higher energy content, but it's probably going to be, it's a better, from the point of view, if you want to, in certain cases where you wanted to provide more energy, it's probably it's far better source of energy than it is to start feeding concentrates, because at least again, you are going to be providing good fibre source that then the normal physiological digestive functions can be carried out. So, I think it's kind of a nice stark environment, or chalk and cheese there of environments that donkeys do live in. Obviously, the top there is what they've evolved to live in, and it's just really to highlight the fact that this is our big challenge. It's, certainly for us down in Devon, you know, we inherited a lot of very lush cattle pasture. Obviously, it's been fertilised, developed to ensure that you get good milk production. Clearly, from the point of view of what I've just been saying, bearing in mind that grasses can contain a high amount of sugar. If you've got all that grass available, it's no wonder that they're not going to stop themselves from chewing on through that. So it's no wonder that we have a challenge from the point of view of weight management if they have free access to that much grazing. The only positive I would say from this picture down here is that at least on the side of a mountain to a degree here, so you can use that from the point of view of if you can then manage your grazing well for using the kind of the contours of your environment to mean they have to work, exercise a bit more, then that can obviously help from the point of view of improving the disparity between the grass available and their energy requirements. But we know for a fact that there are these sugars in the grass, the fructans, and that again we'll talk a little bit more about why those are so much of a concern to us when we talk about a little bit about metabolic syndrome a bit later on. But they can be in high levels at various parts of the year, and that's when you've got to be very careful about the exposure to large amounts of grass. So we need to manage that, and you can manage that in different ways. You can either manage that by containing the amount of grazing that donkey has available to it from something like strict grazing, so you fence off areas and only allow them access to a contained amount on a controlled basis when you decide that more grazing is available. Or you can try to stock them but then graze them with other species as well, things like sheep, etc., that will then bring the level of grazing down to try and ensure that they don't have excessive amounts of grass available to them. So haylage is something that we use quite a lot. It is a wetter product, obviously, than hay. It can be up to 50% water. So you've got to bear that in mind when we're talking about dry matter intake. Obviously, your haylage can be as little as 50% dry matter, so that has an impact on how much you can then make available to them. And it's good for certain conditions, certainly if you've got any respiratory conditions, then if you've got well-made haylage, that can be a useful food source without having the problems of dust and allergens. And because it tends to be cut quite early, you've got to be really careful. You can have quite a high calorie levels, quite high energy and low fibre in it. So you've got to be a bit careful about the type of haylage that you feed. And we'll talk about a little bit more about one that a lot of people will use is hay. It tends to be a lot drier, obviously, than haylage. But again, it will have a water content in it, so it's not 100% dry matter. So again, bear that in mind when you're thinking about the amount you're going to feed. Hay gets cut at various different times of the year, but an ideal one is sort of the later stage cuts tend to have less sugars in them, more fibre, so they tend to be a better bet for donkeys. And also, the longer it's been stored, obviously the nutritional content will decline, and sometimes you can use that to a benefit as long as you've still got good quality hay. You don't want poor quality hay, so you've got to be careful about that from the point of view of dust and allergies, not just like you would in horses. But again, you've got to be careful as well, because it can still have quite high levels of sugar in there. And then really the mainstay, from our point of view for donkeys, is straw. We tend to use oat or barley straw. Wheat straw just tends to be a little bit too fibrous for most donkeys to cope with. So our standard one would be barley that we would use. It tends to have a sort of middle energy level. Oat straw would usually have a slightly higher energy level, and wheat straw would have usually, generalisation, but we usually have a slightly lower energy level. So obviously the straw is the byproduct of whatever grain is being grown, but from that point of view, it's cut after the harvest. So you've got a very mature plant. So what you then tend to get is you get a low energy, high fibre type of product, which is why it's pretty ideal for feeding to donkeys. But we've said it's a product that's been produced from, it's a byproduct that's been produced from the point of view that the grain is being harvested. You've got to be really careful about the amount of grain that's in your straw, because there can be a heck of a lot. And anybody that's seen donkeys when you just put a load of new straw down, you can guarantee what they'll do. They'll burrow through it, get these damn great holes right down to the bottom. And what they're doing is they're getting through to all that grain that's tipped down at the bottom. So it's really quite important that when you get your straw, you can tell it, you just shake it out, and you can see how much grain is in it. Right? Yeah, yes. I would say if you've got the options, then we would normally go with barley, just because the wheat tends to just be a little bit more woody than the barley. But in some ways, if you've got donkeys that are healthy, good teeth, etc., then actually, you have less of an issue with a lot of the wheat straw from the point of view of the energy level is usually lower. But you can still have the same problem from the point of view of the grain in it, so it's something you've still got to keep an eye on. And it depends on the production, and sort of certainly, as well as working with the UK donkeys, I work with our European bases as well, and you get sort of varying different levels of how much time and effort someone's taken to get rid of the grain. And some of the products you see, it's almost like feeding a concentrate with the amount of grain that's in there. So you do have to be really careful with that. And again, because obviously farmers are trying to produce a crop here, they're not particularly fussed about what's going on in the byproduct, the straw at the end of it. They want to get the most out of their crop. So the sort of modern farming methods, actually, the straw in itself is becoming more nutritious. So it's all going against us from the point of view of what we really want, which is this nice low energy, high fibre food source that's available to us. But we can help ourselves, and that's what I put there at the bottom, is that we can analyse what we're feeding. And that can help you quite a lot. Kind of a standard one for one of our haylages. So you can see we've made quite a dry haylage up there. It's got a 72% dry matter content. We've obviously analysed a fair few things down there. The really important things to just sort of highlight from the point of view of this talk are what are our residual sugars. So they're at about 7%. That tells you obviously a little bit about the energy content of that, but it also tells you about the fermentation characteristics of that haylage product. Because if the sugars are still quite high, it means you haven't, the product hasn't fermented properly, and you might be worried about feeding that from the point of view of the quality of that product as well. But what we're really interested in here is the digestible energy content. And as you can see, we're going to struggle a little bit with this over the summer, because we've got a 7.9 megajoules per kilo digestible energy content, and we were talking about trying to feed something that's about 5.5 to 6.5, particularly in warmer weather. But at least it tells us and we can plan, and we can make some decisions about what we're going to feed and how much and when. Because this is something that maybe added into straw over the winter is going to be very valuable when we do need to increase our energy levels a little bit. But we want to be very careful, particularly if they've got access to grass over the summer. We want to be very careful about feeding this over the summer because of that energy level. And the other really important thing, we've got all this science, you can do all that, and you can plan your diet, but what's the most important thing is what does your donkey look like? That's the really important thing, and that's the thing you want to be monitoring. Okay? And the only way you can monitor that is hands-on. You can't stand back and look at your donkey and go, well, yeah, that kind of looks okay to me. You've got to get in there, you've got to feel that animal, and you've got a body condition score, so that you, yourself, can start to follow what your animal's condition is like, and how it's fluctuating over time. It will fluctuate, but it's not a perfect system, and it's supposed to fluctuate as well. But you want to try and ideally fluctuate around our ideal body condition score of 3. We used the 5-point system, but then we're quite lazy because then we add half points to it. So it's a bit cheaty, but that's what we do. So we try and keep donkeys somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 on that kind of condition score scale. And you've got to feel them, and you've got to feel them all over, because they do regionally lay down fat as well. It's not necessarily a nice constant process of laying down fat from the kind of nose to the tail. So always feel the crest as a good starting point. Not least obviously because that starts to tell you how much fat is there, but also the firmness of that crest. Because if that donkey is gradually putting on weight, then that crest is going to get harder and harder. Whereas if that donkey is gradually losing weight, what tends to happen is the crest starts to soften as the fat starts to leave it, even though the crest might still be there. I'm sure you've seen it all when you've had a donkey that's been overweight, even if it loses a lot of weight elsewhere on its body, it can still have quite a fat cresty neck that kind of falls over. But if that's soft, then we know we're going in the right way. If it's getting really hard, we know we're going in the wrong way, and the animal is laying down excessive amounts of fat. Likewise, over the rib cage, it's a really useful place to start feeling for development of fat. Again, it doesn't sort of uniformly fill the side of the donkey. You start to get what I call panniers forming along the top line of the rib cage first of all. So that's a good point to feel first of all, because if you start, that's the first point of where you get to. You can say, well, no, that's nice. You can feel ribs quite nicely lower down the sides of the chest. But they still have those little fat panniers started. When they're starting to produce those, you know you're getting up into the condition score 4 regions, and you know that donkey's starting to put on weight. And then, obviously, look at the back end of the donkey, the bump. And again, you want to be checking that you're not getting fat pads forming over the bony prominences of the pelvis, and then obviously starting to go very round the bum as well. As donkeys age as well, they change, and obviously they do lose a bit of muscle mass as well. So older donkeys are always far more challenging to condition score than younger donkeys. But certainly with the older donkeys, the best place I find to be sort of starting with is the rib cage, because that tends to stay fairly constant over time with regards to the fluctuations in fat, whereas the neck and the bum, other things can happen with regards to just aging-related processes. So it's really important, and if you don't get there and start handling the donkey and touching the donkey and feeling, particularly, again, a lot of our donkeys have quite thick coats, so if you're not there actually getting past that thick coat and feeling, you're not getting a really hands-on idea of what that donkey's condition score is. So we just look at a few examples of types of donkey that we might be feeding and how best to do that. So if you've got young, fit, healthy adult donkeys, then the mainstay should be straw, supplemented with restricted grazing and hay, depending on body condition score and the time of year that you're feeding that donkey. And that's really all they should need. If you've got something that's a bit more challenging, certainly as these guys get older, they do start to suffer with dental disease. They basically, they outlive their teeth, which is we're obviously getting a lot better at maintaining both horses and donkeys from the point of view of other health issues into older age. But the teeth have a finite lifespan. There's nothing we can do about that. And as that lifespan comes to an end, we have to start reassessing how we're going to feed those donkeys. And also at the end stage, because you think about their quality of life with regards to whatever dental disease they have, because they can have these very painful problems, like we've got down here, where we get gaps forming between the teeth called diastema, and there's horrible food packing between these teeth, which it doesn't take much imagination to think that's got to be damn painful. You've got a tongue sat by the side on one side and a cheek on the other side, and then you're trying to do the normal grinding motion to chew fibre. So we have to think about, well, one, obviously we have to manage the dental disease and determine whether it is manageable, but then we have to think about what we're going to feed these animals to ensure they are getting fibre and energy, but in a manageable source. So by this stage, they might be starting to have problems with regards to the non-fibre, say if they've got things like diastema or a lot of missing teeth. So we have to think of other ways of providing fibre at that stage. So we want to make sure we're doing this. We can't just let this animal sort of try to manage on the non-fibre, because we know that we get dental pain. We certainly know that dental disease is one of the major risk factors for infection and colic. And if they're not chewing this fibre down, they're not then going to be able to process it through the rest of the digestive tract, and they are going to lose body condition. As I said earlier, we are also thinking about this from a quality of life point of view, and how severe this dental disease is and can we manage it. So this is an older slide from the point of view of what I would like to have put up here, but we can support donkeys with dental disease and do it in a way that we do limit the risk of weight gain as well, so that's obviously what we're still trying to avoid. And we can do that by providing some of the proprietary feeds available that are short chopped already for us. And that can help us with animals that are struggling with chewing long fibres. And we can start to supplement that as well with some bucket type feeds, as we call it, but if we are doing that, they still have to be high in fibre, because we don't want to get into that tipping over balance of providing them with too high levels of starches and sugars when we know that that is a risk factor for other types of disease that we're talking about. Older donkeys that are probably more predisposed to by that stage in their life as well. We don't want to exacerbate any problems with regards to pain and discomfort in the mouth by causing other painful conditions like gastric ulceration. So there are a number of products on the market, high fibre cubes, high fibre nuts that are available, and say there are short chop products available. But again, if they're not donkey specific, we're quite lucky in the UK, we have a number of donkey specific products. If they're not donkey specific and you're using horse-based products, they still have to be low in starches and sugars. And a lot of horse-based products are very molasses. That's lovely because the animals love to eat them, but that's like eating just a bag of sweets. And it's really important that we try and avoid that. So you want, wherever possible, it's like, for example, that's that middle picture, which is a fibre beet or speedy beet. It needs to be the unmolasses version to be an appropriate additional food source for your donkey. And again, with the short chops, you can get those that have quite high energy contents as well. You want to be trying to get the lowest energy short chops you can get, which is quite challenging, but they do go down to the sort of 7.5 megajoules of digestible energy content. So you can get lowish short chops, and then if you feed those appropriately, then you can manage these donkeys on, again, bearing in mind, we're trying to trickle feed them. We really don't want to be getting to just 2 meals a day because of the risks to the rest of the digestive system. So we want to try and spread out whatever feed we're giving over as much of a 24-hour period as possible for digestive health, but not least from the point of view of that animal's quality of life as well. You know, they're designed to browse. If you just give them 2 feeds a day and the rest of the day they're stood there, you know, that's not good from the point of view of expressing natural behaviour, basically. So we've got to think about that as well when we're thinking about how we're feeding. Sort of the other end of the spectrum, what we're talking about with regards to overweight animals, obviously we do come up against animals with poor body condition as well, and we have to think about how we're going to feed those. Before we do that, we have to try and work out why they're in poor body condition though. There's no point in trying to throw a lot of food at them if there's other things going on that you need to rectify first of all. So you need to know whether you've got any health problems in this animal, so a thorough veterinary check over to ensure there's nothing that's actually a primary cause of this animal's poor body condition. Certainly as these animals do get a bit older, with probably with subclinical disease problems, maybe some dental issues, they can start to drop off, which again, hopefully, if your body condition scoring them regularly, ideally at least once a month, then you will hopefully pick up on this. And some animals do, particularly as they get older, they do seem to lose their appetite a little bit. But one of the most important things that you need to bear in mind is that often you've got a companion who isn't underweight, and often sometimes that companion can actually be overweight as well. So you've got to think about how you're going to manage animals, but also try and work out, is this a competition thing? Is this one donkey in poor condition because matey there is coming in and stealing all the pies? So yeah, you've got to bear that in mind as well when you're trying to assess why was animal is in a poor body condition. If one's in very, is overweight, you've got to start thinking, hello, is something going on here? We've got some behaviour going on. And if you do, obviously, you need to address that with individual feeding whilst they can still see their companions, because otherwise they might not want to eat at all. But you've got to sort of just work all these things through before deciding what you're then going to do with regard to how you're going to feed this donkey. So again, if we've got a core doer and we've identified that there are no specific medical problems that we need to treat, then we need to kind of provide a better energy source for these donkeys. So again, you can go to the higher energy short chops then. So we've got things like the alpha A then, which you can look at feeding. Obviously it has a higher protein content as well, so you need to be a little bit careful again, making sure you have had that animal checked out and hasn't got any liver or kidney disease that you might be worried about. But then you can look at other ways of providing energy. And before going to the starches and sugars, you're probably, particularly assuming you haven't got liver disease, so again you need to rule that out, then providing energy as oil can be a very, very valuable energy source. So we have a specific product available called Epidual, which is rice bran, which has a high oil content in it. You can actually just use oil. We usually recommend soy oil, and you can feed up to 100 ml of that a day. You tend to have to do that gradually because of the palatability issues. So you obviously don't want it, if you've got a dog that's already got a poor appetite, you don't want to cram something new in and then find that they can't tolerate that at all. So you need to try that and introduce that gradually. And you can help with that with regards to appetite stimuli. Things like peppermint cordial. They love peppermint often if they've been used to getting it. So you can add something like some peppermint cordial in a small amount, just to try and act as a bit of an appetite stimulus while you maybe are adjusting your diet to try and get a bit more oil in, something like that. But again, it's a bit like from the point of view of sometimes as people get older, they don't want to be over-faced, so don't whack a massive meal in front of your donkey. Try sort of small, manageable meals interspersed during the day, as well as obviously say trying to provide this fibre source, whether it's still your long fibre or short chop, to keep the animal's digestive system active throughout the rest of the day as well. But again, it's at the bottom of all my slides here, is if you've done all this and your animal's still losing condition, then you do need to consider what's going on and whether and the quality of life of this animal from the point of view of its body condition score or whatever other conditions it has that you're obviously, unfortunately, not being able to manage. There we go. A bit large there. But yeah, this is another time, we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about some metabolic problems as well. Pregnancy is a strain, and certainly the energy demands do increase gradually over the last 3 months, and by 12 months, maybe that's a bit variable from the point of view of when the donkey is going to necessarily give birth, but you've got a 20% increase in the digestible energy content. And superimposed on that, you've got this animal with a massive abdomen that's got a damn great hole in it, which is going to have some pressure effect on the stomach as well. So you've got to sort of think about how you're going to maintain appetite and get this additional energy content into this donkey. So yeah, at this stage you can certainly feed to the animal's appetite, so you can have ad-lib, good quality hay or haylage. And again, we wanted to think about providing vitamin and mineral supplementation here as well, and a bit of a protein source. So stud balance can be a useful addition at this stage. So once we've given birth, we've still got increased energy demands and lactation. So again, this is a really important time to be monitoring your dog's body condition because they can drop off quite quickly. So again, they have an ad-lib access to hay or haylage, and should probably still continue that stud balance on for at least the first 3 months. And here again, if you need to, you can supplement that diet with a high fibre source of fibre nut or cube. As a rule of thumb for sort of standard sized donkey, when I say standard, it's usually sort of 180 kilos. You wouldn't want to feed more than a kilo of nuts in one meal, so you probably start with about a half a kilo and see how they get on with that. And then once this donkey has started to explore its surroundings, we need to make sure we provide the youngster with a fibre source as well, because that's what they should be, again, getting most of their energy from. We've got to be careful, we don't want them to grow too quickly, because that can have problems as well from the point of view of various developmental issues, and we certainly don't want them to be putting on excess weight. So be careful with the amount of grazing they get. They should then be good quality hay. Again, it should be their mainstay, and we can again supplement them with stud balance to give them that vitamins and minerals and protein that they require for growth. We can continue that up for about 18 months. Laminitic animals. Again, we'll talk a little bit about this and the reasons why we need to be careful what we feed a little bit in the next talk. So the most important things is no cereal-based products. So too high in starches and sugars, and they will predispose, even if the animal hasn't had a bout of laminitis. The risk of being a donkey and the risk of developing laminitis is quite marked. So anything you can do to add to that risk is just going to potentially be that ticking time bomb, tipping them over into a laminitic crisis. And again, from that point of view, manage your grazing. The sugars in grass at the growing season, but other times of the year as well. So you can have very short grass over the winter. Obviously, it's not growing, but there's still the sugars in there. If you then get sharp frosts, the grasses break open, their structure breaks down, and the sugars that are being contained are released. And that in itself can be, we see these kind of spikes of laminitis after cold, frosty weather as well. So just be a little bit careful of that. And the other thing to be careful of is, it sounds like you can't do anything right with a donkey. I'm not trying to paint a massively negative picture, but you've got to be careful of even when you're controlling your grazing, because you control your grazing, but the grass is still growing. You just don't see it because they're there nibbling it down as soon as it's growing up. So you've just got to be aware that what looks like a bare paddock, if you can see grass on it, isn't a bare paddock. And that grass is still going to be coming up, and they're going to be nibbling it off. It's obviously going to be quite energy dense at that stage because it's struggling to grow. So you've got to be really careful with that type of management system as well. And people can become like, I'm really doing really well, I'm controlling all this grazing, how come my animal's got laminitis? And sometimes it can be that is that there's just enough grass keep coming up, particularly during the growing season, high in the sugars, and that can be enough to tip certain animals over. It's all doom and gloom, isn't it? Sorry. You can do this safely, I promise you. We've got a lot of donkeys, 2,500 donkeys, and we manage, we don't say none of them have laminitis, but we do manage to feed these donkeys. It's about knowing what conditions you've got, it's about knowing the concept of the type of feeding you should be doing to manage those conditions. So yeah, if we're going to feed, well, whatever fibre we're going to feed, we need to know about the energy content in it. So if it's hay or haylage, if you've got laminitis prone animals, it is really valuable to know what's in your hay and haylage. So analyse that. If you're going to feed your straw, again, just be careful about the energy content, the grain content. I've been out to a farm before, and animals are sort of dropping down with laminitis around me. You look around and just put new straw in, and you look at the straw, and it's actually pretty much a concentrate feed. So be careful of that, as I said earlier, and if you're going to feed short chops, do make sure that they are low energy, unmolasses, or at least very low molasses, because you need to get some palatability in there. But again, on the bag, it will tell you what the energy content is. The other thing to bear in mind about that, though, is these energy contents are at best guesstimates for horses. Okay? We've already said that donkeys are far more efficient digesters than horses, so we can assume, and it's only an assumption still, we haven't got the data for it, we can assume they're going to draw even more energy out of that product than a comparable horse is going to as well. So just, that kind of exacerbates the concept that if you feed a high energy mix, then they're going to be putting out even more energy from that as well. Spot the difference. On occasions, we obviously do have to manage donkeys that are on box rest, and that can be quite challenging. Again, we're trying to obviously keep food going through these animals. We're trying to trickle feed them and find different ways to do that without them getting bored and without them eating it too quickly. We want to try and keep them moving as well, so that you do reduce risks of things like compaction colics. So, there's a number of things that you can do: small hold nets, double netting, to just try and increase the amount of time it's going to take to forage for that fibre. Making sure whatever you are feeding them is obviously low calorie, and keeping it in small manageable amounts that you feed frequently. Oh, I'm sorry. So we'll be talking about the challenges of maintaining animals at a condition score 3. It does go wrong, and then we can end up with animals looking like this, condition score 5 off the scale. And we obviously need to be able to diet these animals. You can do it. It takes time and effort and a lot of imagination as well, but it can be done. But you've got to do it carefully as well. You just don't want to starve these animals. We've just spoken about all the really important things about continuous browsers, continuous trickle feeding, making sure something's going through that digestive tract all the time. They certainly shouldn't be starved. Again, we're going to talk about another condition in a bit, whereby there's a high risk of developing that if they don't have enough energy going into them. Obviously, we just said about the fact that Mr. Fatty here might have a skinny friend, so you've got to think about how you're going to manage the two types of feeding, which can be quite difficult. You've got to get a plan together to how you're going to do this to sort of meet the requirements of both donkeys or the group of donkeys if you're dealing with larger numbers. And you've got to try. The feeding management is one thing, but certainly in these animals, it's about being imaginative about exercise as well. So even if it's just that they have to search for their food or something, as opposed to providing it and they're stood there in front of it all day, sometimes you've got to think a little bit outside the box. So they are moving around, or the food is in one place, and then again, maybe there's a bit of a hill or whatever to get to water, whatever. You've got to think of ways of just trying to encourage their natural exercise, and obviously any exercise you can do with them as well to encourage weight loss. You do have to be careful, and so again, where keeping an eye on what's happening is really important, because if they lose weight too quickly when they're in this state, you can potentially cause hypoglycemia, which we're going to talk about in a minute. That obviously can be fatal. And if, say, at any stage you're concerned about the amount of weight the animal's losing, then it's worth getting the animal checked out and blood sample taken just to see what the levels of triglycerides are doing over time, so we don't run into any risks of developing hypoglycemia. So again, we're trying to do a bit of exercise, and we're trying to manage our grazing so that we're keeping them on as lower a grazing level as we possibly can. But again, we don't want to get bored either, so we've got to think of ways of stimulating these animals, giving them things to keep them busy as well, moving around, so that they're enjoying their diet as opposed to suffering through their diet. Just quickly, a couple of sort of the key diseases where you might want to think about how you slightly modify dietary management. Certainly, if we've got a dog with kidney disease, it's not that common, but we do see it. And it's often in these cases they are in poorer body condition as well, so if you've got chronic kidney disease, then you tend to lose condition. And often they're older as well, so they might have dental-related issues. If they don't have dental-related issues, then linked quality hay would be the mainstay, and if they do have dental issues, then you'd be looking at a kind of a short top to be the primary source of energy. But you can, so this is a condition where you can add oil into the diet as an additional energy source that can be quite useful to improve body condition. So I said we try and go with soy oil if you're going to use straight oil, or if there's a product on the market which is high in oil, you can use that as well. various different supplementations. You can either use just a primary B vitamin, and there are cheap ways of doing that, or there are obviously proprietary balancers on the market which have a balanced vitamin and mineral content. Again, you'd be wanting to use the low energy ones of those, so nothing that has a high starch or sugar content in there. And it's about just trying to tempt them sometimes as well. So there's a whole kind of raft of different tempters that we've tried over the years that can be quite helpful. And so certainly things like actually the menu beans can work quite well, and the mint leaf and the peppermint cordial works quite well, or just chopped apples and carrots on top of whatever you're trying to feed can be quite a good appetite stimulant as well. So just to kind of stimulate the doggy's interest in whatever it is you're trying to feed them. So be careful with feeding anything that's high in protein, things like the alfalfas. So don't feed the standard equine senior or conditioning feeds because they will have too high levels of starches and sugars in them. And just use various safe treats to try and stimulate the appetite. Many things we can use in the UK, so we'll do that away. And the other main condition that the doggies get, we find that they get older, is liver disease. So here you don't want to provide a fatty content in the diet. Or you said that one of the problems of having too much fat is that it gets laid down in the liver. Obviously, you want to avoid that. Rather than, it says low protein there, yeah, we don't massively high protein, but you want a good quality protein in the diet. And this is one where we will use a vitamin and mineral balance of the protein content in it as well. But again, still a low energy one to ensure that we're not providing excess energy. That said, if they're underweight donkeys, then you can provide slightly higher energy or energy content balancer as well. And that's just the ranges of the people. And that's it on food. Any questions? Oh, crikey. I've not come across it from the point of view of we don't feed it. I mean, the straw base itself should have similar characteristics to any grain crop where you've harvested the crop and then you're using the straw. What I'd probably suggest, because I don't know what the energy content of that would be, if you get it analysed, so you just knew what the energy content, that would probably be a good idea. I mean, the other thing I wouldn't know about is how fibrous that product is. Because again, if it's too woody, then they can struggle with it a bit. But say, I probably don't know enough about that product. Certainly, if you've got it analysed, at least you know what your energy content is and that. Because although I was talking about analysing haylage, you can analyse the straw as well.
What about feeding tree leaves?
Tree leaves?
Yes.
Leaves themselves we don't tend to feed, and we give them branches and things to kind of chew off. You've just got to be careful about the type of trees that you're providing them with. Obviously, there are certain types that we'd be concerned about, particularly at certain times of year, things like the ACEs, with regard to concerns over atypical myopathy, oak trees as well, the leaves there, and would be potentially concerned. But there are certainly safe trees that you can use. So it depends on the type. Certainly you can. We do use it from the point of view of mental stimulation as well, as a browsing thing for donkeys to have a chew on. And sometimes it saves your fences as well. Because they're pretty good at chewing through those. That's their browse, so that's because they're browsing. So if all they've got is a feel for the grass, you might think that's fantastic for them, but that's not actually what they want. If you give them like brambles and sort of hedgerows, etc., they'll be in there and they'll grovel through there because that's what they're designed to do. They haven't got that and they've got a fence in front of them, they'll be out, right, okay, that's nice, that's a bit of wood. So they'll have a go at that as well. So, that's just natural behaviour, but if you can give them kind of bits of wood to do that with, then sometimes that saves fences. Yeah, they should be browsing for a good 16 hours a day. Yeah? And so, even when we're dieting donkeys, unless we're doing it in a very strictly controlled environment, even when we're dieting donkeys, they will have ad-lib access to straw, okay? And then they can choose when they stop and how they stop. Because that's the other thing is, if we impose that on them, then the other thing to bear in mind, they are continuous acid secretors, as we just said. If you give them 6 hours without anything, that doesn't stop their stomachs producing gastric acid through that time, and it's got nothing to work on in that time either. So it is really important that for most of the day they are, they're browsing. They're often going to be travelling in long distances, and that's how they can maintain a normal body condition. They're finding things to eat, they're moving around the place, and that's what creates a healthy environment for your donkey.
I'm going to be a pig and take 2 questions.
Whoa.
Okay, so just to be clear, the digestible energy that you're showing there, that's digestible energy calculated for horses, correct? It's not, nobody's put a donkey in a metabolic trait and measured, okay, so those are horses.
This is what you've got to really bear in mind, is that, so we don't know the percentage greater efficiency, but bearing in mind they are more efficient at getting energy out of low energy, high fibre sources of feed. We can suppose that their ability to get energy out of proprietary horse feed would be greater than an example.
And the other thing is, having lived in the Midwest for a while where they harvest lots of corn, there's a lot of dry corn stalks out there, which is what they feed donkeys in Mexico. Is that something that you might utilize?
Yeah, I mean, say once the grain's gone, then whatever's left is a feeding source. And certainly, we say we're in some of the European bases that we work, and they're still working the donkeys as well. That's what they'll do. The donkeys will be on the crop fields after they've harvested. The only problem then is that they haven't harvested very well and a lot on the floor. We end up with very overweight donkeys in those environments as well. So you've got to make sure that you've just got the stalk left and not a huge amount of grain.
Yes, is teff hay an option for feeding donkeys? It's supposed to be low in protein and sugars.
Okay, I don't know the product specifically, but if it's low in protein and sugars and has a lowish digestible energy content, then it essentially is. It's about knowing what the energy content actually is in there as well. But I would suspect, obviously, if it's fairly low in sugars, then one would hope it has quite a low energy content. But again, I would probably get that analysed. I'm assuming that your feed companies out here offer a similar service to the ones back home, but they wouldn't. It's not, at least it's not extortionately expensive. And if you bear in mind that then you can then modify what you're feeding, then that can actually help from the point of view of cost benefit as well.
What about oat hay? You talk about oat straw, and I heard that the nitrate content being too high. Can you address that question, the issue?
Yeah, again, say, I haven't got any specific experience of oat hay other than again, in some of our European bases over in Romania where we work, they have something called a mash hay, which is a bit like that. It's grass, but it also has some sort of cereal type component to it. Again, the concern is the amount of oat that would be in there from the point of view of the starches and sugars. You've got to be careful, sure, with things like your nitrite levels as well, but I'd probably be more concerned about the cereal content, and that in itself would be having the impact on the nitrate levels as well. Back on the webinar?
Yes, we have two related questions. What is your opinion on salt mineral blocks? Are they adequate for maintenance mineral supplementation, and do they contain too much iron?
Right. You've got to be careful what blocks you use. You certainly don't want to use cattle blocks. You want to use equine blocks. And what you've got to be careful with those is that you get animals that are absolutely addicted to them because they do just basically overdose on them. So you have to be quite careful. If you want to know you're getting a balanced vitamin and mineral intake, and in certain cases I think it's quite important you do. Certainly if you're dieting donkeys and you are actually only giving them straw, because the important thing to bear in mind there when I'm talking about that dieting donkeys and they get added straw, they really shouldn't be getting any access to grass at all with that that, because obviously that is then, you can't control that, you can't control what other energy they're getting. But obviously, on just a straw-based diet, you would have to be slightly concerned about vitamin and mineral supplementation. And my personal preference there would be to go to a proprietary supplement where they've done all the calculations, albeit horse-based again, but they've done the calculations from the point of view of appropriate levels, and just again go for, they tend to get called out of laminitic safe, forage balances, something like that, whereby you know that you've still got that low energy content in them.
And then the related question is, why do my donkeys eat dirt from the ground?
Why do, again, sometimes they get a bit addicted to it. People do sometimes worry that that is because of a lack of some sort of vitamin and mineral part of the diet. Sometimes it can be, but if you're feeding a balanced diet, then sometimes it can just be an addictive nature as well. You know, animals can do some fairly unpleasant things. They can eat their own poo as well.
I know we have a lot more questions here, but Dr. Rickards' next lecture, a lot of the questions I think are probably going to be the same.
Probably.
So basically, because of the relationship between nutrition and these metabolic diseases. So we're going to go ahead and go on